My mother planned it for 6 weeks. I know the exact timeline because Colton Hartman, the private investigator she hired, told me afterward. She'd made her first call to his firm on a Tuesday in late September, 2 days after our argument at my nephew's birthday party. She'd pooled the money with my father and my brother Marcus, $12,000 total, wired in 3 installments, so no single payment looked too large. She'd been methodical about it. I had to give her that. What she hadn't accounted for was the clause in Colton's contract, the one his firm had included since a lawsuit 7 years prior, that required a dual-party investigation whenever a family dispute was the stated reason for hire. She hadn't read the fine print. Marcus definitely hadn't. None of them had any idea what was coming. My name is Charlotte Reeves. I'm 38 years old. I run a logistics company called Meridian Transit Solutions out of a 10-floor office in downtown Cincinnati, Ohio, and as of last April, the company is valued at $160 million. We manage freight routing for 4 regional hospital systems, 2 automotive manufacturers, and a federal infrastructure contract that I'm not at liberty to name specifically. We employ 212 people. I have not told a single member of my biological family any of this. That wasn't always the plan. The plan, if you could call it that, was simply to build the company first. I'd learned early that announcing ambition in my family was an invitation to have it dismantled. When I was 23 and told my mother I was leaving my job at the freight company to start my own routing software firm, she'd laughed the way people laugh when something embarrasses them. "Charlotte," she'd said, setting down her coffee cup with that particular deliberateness she used when she wanted you to feel small, "you've never finished anything in your life." My father had nodded. He always nodded. It was his primary contribution to most conversations. Marcus, 5 years older and the family's declared success story, regional sales director at a pharmaceutical distributor, expensive watch, lease on a BMW he mentioned at least once per family gathering, had shaken his head with something between pity and contempt. "There's no shame in a steady paycheck, Charlotte," he'd said. "Not everyone's cut out to run things." I'd smiled. I'd gone home. I'd built the company anyway. The first 2 years, I lived on almost nothing. My business partner, Nolan Pierce, whom I'd met during a logistics conference in 2011, had invested his own savings alongside mine. We'd eaten a lot of sandwiches. We'd slept in the office more than once during a particularly brutal stretch in year 2 when our primary client threatened to pull their contract over a software integration failure. Nolan had a gift for staying calm under pressure that I'd always admired, a steadiness that came from somewhere private in him, some settled place I was still working to find in myself. What I told my family during those years, that I was freelancing, contract work, some consulting, nothing concrete. Whenever my mother asked, I gave her numbers small enough to satisfy her theory that I was struggling. She found this comforting. I noticed that too. By year 4, Meridian had its first hospital contract. By year 6, the second automotive client. By year 8, the federal work began, quietly, through a procurement process that took 16 months and required a security clearance I still don't discuss at dinner tables. I hired a communications director, whose explicit job included keeping my name out of trade press, unless I approved it. When a logistics industry publication wanted to profile Meridian for a Midwest Freight Leaders feature, I declined. When they called back and offered a cover, I declined again. My mother, during all of this, was telling her friends that her daughter worked in transportation, some kind of coordinator position. That was fine. I didn't need her to know. What I needed, it turned out, was for Nolan to eventually tell me about the weight I was carrying. We'd had dinner in late August, a Thursday I remember, because he'd come straight from a board meeting and was still in his suit, which he almost never wore, and partway through the meal he'd set down his fork and said, with the directness that had always been one of his better qualities, "Charlotte, when was the last time you talked to your family without feeling sick afterward?" I hadn't answered right away. "Because I've watched you prepare for every family event like you're going into a deposition," he said. "For 8 years. And I've never once seen you come back from one of those things without that look." "What look?" "Like you're trying to figure out which version of yourself was real. Theirs or yours." I looked out the restaurant window for a moment. Cincinnati at night. The river lights. A city I'd built a company in, largely in secret, largely to prove to people who weren't watching that I could. "I'm fine," I said. "You're not fine," he said. "You're successful and you're miserable, and those aren't the same thing." This was the conversation I kept turning over in my mind 6 weeks later, sitting at my parents' dining room table in Kenwood, watching my mother unfold a cloth napkin with the serenity of someone who was absolutely certain she was about to win. The birthday dinner was my father's 65th. Richard Reeves, retired accountant, man of few opinions he hadn't borrowed from my mother, was turning 65 and wanted a family dinner. This was a legitimate request. I'd come because I still came. That was the honest truth. Some residual hope I couldn't quite extinguish. A thing I carried the way you carry an old injury that's mostly healed but occasionally makes itself known on cold mornings. Marcus was there with his wife, Tegan, who had the particular social skill of making every compliment sound like an observation about your limitations. Their twin girls, 7 years old and mercifully indifferent to adult politics, were the best part of those evenings. I'd been reading them a series of books about a girl who builds bridges, and they were both deeply invested in whether the third book's suspension design would actually hold. Dinner was pleasant for exactly 45 minutes. The roast was good. My father told a story about a golf game. One of the twins asked if bridges could float, and I explained buoyancy in terms she immediately applied to a theory about her stuffed animals. Then my mother cleared her throat. I'd seen it coming for the last 10 minutes. She had a quality of stillness before she deployed something, a coiling like a sentence was being assembled in real time, and she wanted the room's attention before she released it. "We have something to address this evening," she said. "As a family." Marcus sat up slightly. Tegan set down her fork. "Several of us have had concerns," my mother continued, looking at me with an expression that had always unnerved me. Not angry, not cruel exactly, but clinical, as though she were a doctor delivering a diagnosis she'd already made peace with. About some of the things Charlotte has been telling people. About her work. About what she does. About this company she claims to run. The word claims landed where she intended it to. "We've asked around," my father said. He was reading from the script. He always read from the script. "People have called us. Friends of ours. They've heard things from Charlotte and then looked into it, and it doesn't add up." "It doesn't add up," Marcus agreed, with the cheerful authority of someone who had been waiting to say exactly this. $160 million company that nobody's heard of? Come on. "We hired someone," my mother said, and now she reached under the table and produced a manila envelope, and I watched her hands as she placed it on the white tablecloth, and I thought, she practiced that. She practiced the placement. She wanted the weight of it to be visible. A private investigator. A professional with 30 years of experience. Former law enforcement. "We paid $12,000 for a full investigation because we love you, Charlotte, and we needed the truth." The twins, sensing something seismic, had both gone quiet. The older one, Emma, named before my mother, and I stopped speaking for 8 months, looked at me with serious eyes. I said nothing. "He'll be here shortly," my mother said. "We scheduled this. He's going to read his findings tonight." Marcus smiled. He had a smile that I'd spent 30 years trying to decode, whether it was genuine warmth badly expressed, or whether it was something else entirely, something calculated, and I had never quite managed it. "We just want the truth," he said. "That's all this is." Tegan murmured something that sounded like "of course." I looked at my father. He looked at the tablecloth. I reached for my water glass. My hand was perfectly steady. Inside, in the part of me that still lived at 14 and waited for my mother's approval, there was a sound like something tearing. Not surprise. Not fear. Something more complicated than either. The exhaustion of being known as a liar by people who had never once asked the right questions. "Did you build something?" They might have asked once, any of them. "What was it like? Did it hurt? Do you need anything? Are you proud?" They had asked none of those things. They had pooled $12,000 instead. I excused myself to use the restroom. In the bathroom, I sat on the edge of the tub for 3 minutes. I want to tell you I was composed. I was not entirely composed. There was a moment. It lasted maybe 90 seconds, where I put my face in my hands and let myself feel the particular grief of this, that my mother's most sustained act of attention toward me as an adult was a paid investigation into whether I was real. I thought about calling Nolan. I didn't. I washed my face. I went back to the table. Colton Hartman arrived at 7:45. He was a compact, careful man in his early 60s, with a quality of stillness that I would later learn he developed during 14 years as an FBI financial crimes investigator before going private. He carried a slim briefcase and wore a dark blazer with no tie, and when my mother introduced him with barely concealed satisfaction, he shook everyone's hands, including mine, with equal courtesy. His eyes, when they met mine, held something I couldn't immediately name. It took me until later to identify it. Apology. He had called me 3 days prior. That call, a Thursday evening, unknown number, a voice that identified itself as Colton Hartman, Hartman Investigative Services, Cincinnati, had been the strangest conversation of my recent years. He told me, in precise and professional language, that he had been retained by a family member to investigate my professional background. He told me that his firm's standard contract included a dual-party clause. He told me that in the course of his investigation, he had uncovered material concerning the parties who retained him that he was ethically obligated to include in his findings. He'd asked if I had a moment to confirm several facts. We'd spoken for 32 minutes. At the end of the call, he'd said, "Ms. Reeves, I want to be straightforward with you. I don't deliver half-truths. I never have. What I found on your family, I have an obligation to present it. You should be prepared." I'd asked him what he'd found. He'd told me. I'd sat in my car in the parking garage of my own office building for 45 minutes afterward. Not because I was surprised in some deep, awful way. I was not surprised, but because knowing something and having it confirmed by a former FBI investigator with documentation are different kinds of knowing, and the second kind takes time to settle. When I'd finally driven home, I'd called Nolan. He'd answered on the second ring. "They hired a PI," I said. A pause. "You okay?" "Not entirely. Do you want me to come over?" "Not tonight." "But he found something on Marcus." Another pause. Longer. "How bad?" I told him. "Charlotte." "I know. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to go to dinner," I said. "And I'm going to sit there. And I'm going to let it happen." Colton Hartman placed 2 envelopes on the table beside my father's birthday cake, which sat slightly to the left, its unlit candles a small absurdity against everything else. "I want to thank the Reeves family for the opportunity to present my findings," he said, in the measured cadence of someone who had testified before federal judges and knew exactly how to fill a room without raising his voice. "Before I begin, I want to be transparent about my firm's methodology. When I'm retained to investigate a party in a family dispute, I am professionally obligated to investigate all connected parties whose financial activities are relevant to my findings. That is standard practice. It is in your contract, Mrs. Reeves, on page 3, paragraph 2. My mother's expression shifted by approximately 2 millimeters. "I have 2 envelopes," he said. "I'll begin with the subject of the original investigation." He opened the first envelope. Charlotte N. Reeves, age 38. Cincinnati, Ohio. He set a single page on the table and slid it toward the center. Founder and Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Transit Solutions, LLC. Company valued at $162 million as of the most recent third-party valuation completed in March of this year. Active federal infrastructure contract. 212 employees. Headquarters located at 480 4th Street, downtown Cincinnati, floors 7 through 16. He paused. "Ms. Reeves has no outstanding debts, no legal judgments against her, no criminal record, and no history of fraudulent claims of any kind." Another pause. "Every statement she has made about her professional life that I was able to verify has been accurate." The room was completely silent. My father's mouth was open. Marcus had gone a particular color, not pale exactly, but evacuated, as though something had left him suddenly. My mother was looking at the paper on the table. Tegan had placed her hands flat on the tablecloth, very still. Emma, the twin, leaned toward me and whispered, "Mom said you didn't have a real job." I looked at her. "I know," I said quietly.
That was wrong, she said.
Yes, I said. It was. Colton Hartman cleared his throat. Second envelope. My brother's hand moved toward his water glass and didn't quite reach it. Marcus David Reeves. Age 43. Cincinnati, Ohio. Regional Sales Director, Praxis Pharmaceutical Distribution. Hartman set a second page on the table, and this one was longer, 3 pages stapled. In the course of investigating Miss Charlotte Reeves's professional and financial background, I accessed banking records associated with this household through standard forensic methodology. What I found necessitated a separate report. He looked at Marcus directly. Between February of last year and August of this year, 18 months, there are $412,000 in transfers from a Praxis corporate vendor account to a personal account in Marcus Reeves's name. These transfers were not authorized by Praxis's internal financial controls. They are consistent with the pattern of unauthorized vendor account skimming that I investigated on multiple occasions during my time with the FBI. He set the stapled pages down. I have provided copies of the relevant bank records, the vendor account access logs, and a timeline of transactions to both parties. Copies have also been sent, pursuant to my firm's mandatory reporting obligations, to the Ohio Attorney General's Financial Crimes Division. The chair scraped. Marcus was standing. His napkin fell to the floor. He said something. I heard the beginning of it, a sound more than a word, and then he was moving toward the hallway, toward the front door, and Tegan was saying his name in a voice I'd never heard her use, stripped of its careful social coding, just raw alarm underneath. My mother said nothing. My father said nothing. Colton Hartman picked up his briefcase. He looked at me across the table, and there was that expression again, the apology, and something else now, too. Something that looked, faintly, like respect. Ms. Reeves, he said. I'm sorry for the intrusion.
You were doing your job, I said.
I was, he said. And for what it's worth, the work you've built is extraordinary. I stayed at the table for 8 more minutes. Long enough for Tegan to follow Marcus into the front hallway, her voice low and urgent through the wall. Long enough for my father to stare at the unlit birthday candles with an expression I did not have a name for. Long enough for Emma to climb into the chair next to me and lean against my arm without saying anything, which was the most honest comfort available. My mother had not moved. She was looking at the second envelope's pages where they sat on the white tablecloth, and for a moment I saw something in her face that I'd spent my entire adult life waiting to see. Not cruelty, not condescension, but smallness. Genuine human smallness. The face of someone who had organized a story about the world that made them feel safe, and had just watched the organizing principle collapse. I wanted to feel satisfaction. I did not feel satisfaction. I felt tired. I felt the specific, bone-deep exhaustion of someone who had been carrying a weight for a long time and had just been told, by a stranger in a blazer, that they'd been right about it the whole time. I kissed Emma on the top of the head. I told her the third bridge book had a very good ending. I stood up. Charlotte, my mother said. I looked at her. I didn't know, she said. And then, quieter. About Marcus. I know you didn't, I said. I thought, Mom. I kept my voice steady. It was not difficult. I know what you thought. You've thought it my whole life. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. When you're ready to know who I actually am, you have my number. Not the version of me that fits the story you needed.
Me.
She looked at me for a long moment. I couldn't read it entirely, and I'd stopped trying. I walked to the hallway, where Colton Hartman was putting on his coat. He held the door for me. We walked out into the November night together, the cold air immediate and clean after the warm pressure of that room. How long did you know? I asked him, as we reached the end of the driveway. I confirmed your brother's transfers on day 9, he said. Out of 42 days. That must have been a long 33 days. It was, he said. He looked at me. I thought about calling you sooner. I'm glad you waited, I said. I needed to be there for it. Nolan was parked 2 houses down. He'd driven from his house on the east side without me asking, texted me 20 minutes before dinner ended. I'm outside. Take all the time you need. I walked to the car. Got in. He handed me a coffee, still hot, which meant he'd timed it, and didn't say anything for a full minute. How bad? He finally said. Depends on who you're asking. I'm asking you. I looked at the lit windows of my parents' house. Someone's shadow moved behind the curtain. My mother, probably, still at the table. My father, maybe, finally blowing out the candles. My brother's going to be charged with wire fraud, I said. Yes. My mother organized a $12,000 investigation to prove I was a liar, and what she got instead was that. Yes. And she said she didn't know about Marcus. Do you believe her? I thought about it for a long moment. I don't know, I said honestly. I think she told herself a version of him that was easier to live with. The way she told herself a version of me. I looked at the coffee cup in my hands. That's the thing about stories you build around people. They protect you right up until they don't. Nolan started the car. What do you need tonight? He said. Food that I didn't cook and a conversation about literally anything else. I know a place, he said. We drove. 3 weeks later, Marcus was formally charged with wire fraud and unauthorized computer access. Praxis placed him on immediate administrative suspension pending their own internal audit, which, according to their general counsel, would likely surface additional irregularities. Tegan filed for a legal separation the following Tuesday. My father called me on a Sunday morning and asked, with the careful, halting quality of a man choosing each word like he was crossing a river on stones, if I would have coffee with him sometime. I said yes. We have had coffee twice since then. He has not mentioned the dinner. He has asked about Meridian, genuinely asked, not to verify, just to know. He told me, the second time, that he'd always thought I was capable of more than the family gave me credit for. I thanked him. I didn't say that I'd needed him to say, so 20 years ago. Some things don't help once you say them out loud. My mother has texted me 3 times. Once to tell me she's retained a lawyer in connection with Marcus's situation. Once to ask if I'm available for Thanksgiving. Once, the 3rd time, and this one I've read more times than I intend to admit. Simply, I think I owe you an apology. I'm not sure I know how to give it yet. I wanted you to know I'm trying to figure it out. I haven't responded to the Thanksgiving invitation. I have not responded to the apology text either. Not yet. I keep thinking about what Nolan said at dinner those months ago. Are you trying to figure out which version of yourself was real? Theirs or yours? I know the answer now. I knew it, honestly, a long time before that dinner table. What I didn't have, what Colton Hartman gave me, in his precise, unasked-for way, with his dual-party clause and his 2 envelopes, was the documentation. Meridian's 4th quarter numbers came in last week. Record revenue. We're close to landing a contract with a 5th hospital system that would make us the largest regional healthcare logistics provider in Ohio. My communications director sent a draft press release. For the first time, I told her to run it. Let people know. I've kept quiet long enough. Can a person change after seeing themselves the way my mother saw herself at that table? Or is the version we built of someone the version we're always going to carry? Drop a comment. I'd genuinely like to know what you think.